Okay, here's practice exam 4, part 2. I'm supposed to solve this. So let's do that. So number 14, x squared plus 41 is 10x. Remember the x squared, write it over here, x squared with an equal sign. What do? Step 1, get a 0. Step 2, factor. Or you can use the quadratic formula. Remember, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared. This is b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Remember the quadratic formula? All right, so let's go back over here. So first step, jump this 10 over. Oh, I'm sorry, I miscopied that. It's 10x. See the original question, 10x. There we go. Minus 10x plus 41 is 0. And then, so you can try to factor that. That's not going to factor. So a is 1, b is negative 10, c is 41. So I'm going to do the quadratic formula then. Here we go. Negative b, negative 10 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Alright, so that's 10 plus or minus, right, these two negatives here become positive 10, plus or minus the square root of 100 minus 164 all over 2. And that's 10 plus or minus negative 64 over 2. And what do you do with a negative inside of a root? That negative comes out as an I, doesn't it? So it's 10 plus or minus I root 64 over 2, which is 10 plus or minus 8I, right? Because square root of 64 is 8. And then you separate that, 10 over 2 plus or minus 8I over 2, which equals 5 plus or minus 4I. There we go. Okay, so now number 15, same kind of thing, jump this 1 over, r squared plus 3r minus 1 equals 0. Use the quadratic formula, so a is 1, b is 3, c is negative 1. So it's going to be negative b plus or minus, remember the quadratic formula right over here, negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Have that in your 3x5 card for sure. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So that is negative 3 plus or minus square root of 9 plus 4, right? Negative times positive times negative makes positive 4 over 2. So that is then negative 3 plus or minus square root of 13 over 2. Try to fix that there. And so separate those. Negative 3 over 2 plus or minus root 13 over 2. You can write it this way or leave it that way. It's good. There we go. Okay, number 16. The base of a triangle is 16 meters shorter than its height. The area is 96. So over here I'll make the height h, and the base is h minus 16, right? 16 shorter. And I have a right triangle here, so what formula do you always use with the right triangle? A squared, here I have it written down here, a squared plus b squared is c squared. This is c. The side across from, this is the side across from the right angle, right? This side's across from the right angle, so that puts in h squared plus h minus 16 squared is c squared. Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm totally doing the wrong thing. I'm not reading the question. Let's try that again. That was bad math. I apologize. Let's try this again. This is h minus 16. This is h. They want area. I'm going to use the area formula, which is a half times base times height. So area is a half times base times height. What's the area? 96. So I'll put in right there, 96 is a half times the base. This is the base. And then the height, h. All right, so there's my formula. How do we solve that thing? Well, first thing is you got to get rid of that fraction. So multiply both sides by 2. Boom, that's really important. So it'll be 192. Everybody see what happened there? I multiplied both sides by 2. Then this will distribute. So it'll be h squared minus 16h. Now what do we do now? Well, you have an h squared with an equal sign. What do you always do? Step 1, get a 0. So jump the 192 this way, getting a 0 on the other side. You see that? And now we can try to factor that. Now, if you take your calculator, take 192, right? You're looking for two numbers. We're going to try to factor. We're looking for two numbers that multiply to be 192 and add to be 16. You can use the quadratic formula if you want, but I think if you take your calculator, you'll find the answer more easily. So I'm going to take 192 and just start with 2. Divide by 2, use my calculator, get 96. And ask yourself, can 2 and 96 somehow make the 16 in the middle? No way. Now divide by 3. 64. Can 3 and 64 make the 16 in the middle? No way. Divide by 4. Get 48. Can 4 and 48? No way. Divide by 5. It's some decimal. Doesn't even work. Divide by 6. You get 32. Can 6 and 32 make 16? No way. Divide by 7. It's a no. Divide by 8. And you get 24. Ah, there's my pair. 8 and 24. 8 and 24, right? If you take 24 minus 8, it is 16. That's my pair. Now, how do the signs go? Sign in the middle goes on the bigger. Minus 24 plus 8. You good to there? Now, remember how that works. That ends up being h is negative 8 or h is positive 24. Remember, it's just opposite sign because you set each one to 0 and then it moves over. Now, when's the last time you looked at something and its height was negative 8? No way. Cross that out. Height can't be negative, so the height must be 24. So come back here. The height is 24. But what's the base? So the height is 24. But what's the base? Well, the height right here, 24 minus 16, that's 8. That is the base. That negative answer we threw away for height ends up being the other answer for base. That almost always happens. So there we go. The width of a rectangle is 16 feet less than the length. The area is 10. Okay. So for a rectangle, the area of a rectangle is length times width. So area 10. The width is 16 less than the length, so it's length minus 16. So plug in for W. The width right there is L minus 16. See how width equals L minus 16? So now distribute L squared minus 16L. Now, what do we do when we got L squared? You know, get a 0, jump this 10 over. Like that. And now, you can try to factor that. It won't factor. We're going to need to do the quadratic formula. So remember the negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So here we go. A is 1, b is minus 16, c is minus 10. So negative b, negative 16 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So that's what? 16 plus or minus the square root 256 plus 40 all over 2, because negative times negative makes positive 40. And so that is 16 down here plus or minus square root of 296 all over 2. And that means 16 plus the root of 296 all over 2 and 16 minus the root of 296 all over 2. They want decimals, they say. See right here? Round to the nearest hundredth. So they want decimals. So use your calculator now. Now make sure when you put this in on your calculator, you have to hit equals when you're done with the numerator before you hit divide. Before you go divide by 2. So I got, this answer is 16.60. And the other one is negative 0.60. Now, what is this? Is this length, width, height? What is this thing? Remember, we were solving, if you look back, this was L squared, L. This is L, so this is L equals. No way a length can be negative. Throw that out. So the length is 16.60. So come up here, erase this. Length is 16.60. And right here's width. Right here, remember if we had width equals, width is 16 less than the length. So it's length minus 16. So how do we find the width then? Well, now we know the length, 16.60. Put that in right there. 16.60 minus 16.60. The width is 0.60. So the length is 16.60. The width is 0.60. There we go. All right, number 18. Car travels 280 miles at a certain speed. Okay, so we're going to use distance. Here, I'll have room there. Bring it down here. Distance is rate times time. All right, and what am I going to put in here? 280 miles. That's the distance, right? If the speed had been faster, so this is slower, faster. If the speed had been faster, 5 miles an hour faster, so this is x plus 5. The faster is x plus 5 in the rate, right? Speed is rate. Okay, now the distance is the same on the slower trip and the faster trip. The distance is the same. That doesn't change. You just get there in a quicker time. Now, how do we find time? Remember the relationship? When you have d equals r times t, and you want t, I want t, what do? You divide by r, t is d over r. So t is d over r, 280 over x. T here is d over r, 280 over x plus 5. All right, so take those out. 280 over x, 280 over x plus 5. Now, what does it say about those? The trip would have been made in 1 hour less time. 1 hour less time. So 1 hour less time. If I said, hey, I made the trip in 1 hour less time, that means, remember, these are both time amounts. This time and that time, the difference between the subtraction between them is 1. Because that's the difference in time, right? That's the difference in time. The new trip, the faster trip, would have been made in less time. So if you subtract the times, the difference would have been 1. So there's our equation. Now I got to solve that equation. So let me go to a fresh screen. 280 over x plus 5 equals 1. Is that making sense there? the trip would have been made in 1 hour less time. If I say, hey, my brother, what if I just say, my brother is 1 year less than me, his age. The age of my brother is 1 less. What does that mean? My age minus my brother's equals 1, right? If my brother's 1 less, then if I subtract our ages, I'll get 1. That's what it means, right? If 7 is 1 less than 8, then you subtract them, you get 1. So when they tell you 1 hour less time, if you subtract the times, you'll get 1. That's what it means when one thing is 1 less than the other. If you subtract them, the difference is 1. Okay, let's solve the equation now. Multiply, how do you solve it? You got fractions, denominators, so what do? You multiply through by the common denominator. So multiply through by the common denominator and cross cancel. So x cancels x, x plus 5. So we get 280, x plus 5 minus 280x, 1x times x plus 5, distribute. 280x plus whatever 280 times 5 is 1400 minus 280x, distribute x squared plus 5x. These cancel. So I've got 1400 is x squared plus 5x. Alright, what do I do when I have x squared? Get a 0, right? You know the x squared with an equals game plan. Step 1, somebody wakes you up in the middle of the night, get a 0. So 0, like that. Okay. Now, we can try to factor that. That might be hard to factor. Maybe I'll just dive into the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So this is a is 1, b is 5, c is minus 1400. So what do we got? Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So that is plus or minus the square root of 25 plus, what is that? Some big number there, 5600 all over 2. These are big numbers, aren't they? Alright, so this is negative 5 plus or minus square root of 5625 all over 2. Okay. Kind of running out of room here. Go to a fresh screen. Negative 5 plus or minus square root of 5625 all over 2. It's negative 5 plus or minus 75 all over 2. So that's negative 5 plus 75 over 2 or negative 5 minus 75 over 2. And that is 70 over 2, 35. This is negative 80 over 2, negative 40. What is this we're solving? We're solving for x. What is x? It's the rate. So it can't be negative. So it's 35 is x. X is positive 35. Go back. So that means if you put in positive, what do they want here? The speed on the first part of the trip, the speed on the second. So put in x, now we know, x is 35. So put in 35 right there, and 35 plus 5, which is 40 right there. So 35 in the first part, 40 on the second. That's the 5 miles an hour faster on the second part of the trip. There we go, hard problem. Okay, so F equals K M1 M2 over R squared. We're supposed to solve for R. Okay, so how do you solve when you have a whole letter on one side and a fraction on the other? Put it over one, diagonal, diagonal, cross multiply. So F times R squared is 1 times K M1 M2. So, okay. No, now, here's the wall of separation. Trying to get what alone? R alone. So how do we get R alone? Divide by F. So, R squared is K, M1, M2 over F. We don't need that 1 here. 1 times anything is just itself. That doesn't do anything. How do you, now you need regular R. How do you turn R squared into regular R? You root it, don't you? Root it. There it is. R is the square root of K, M1, M2 all over F. Square root of K, M1, M2 all over, there it is. Answer C. Got it. Good. Okay, 21. T equals 4 pi square root of L over G. We're solving for G. How do we solve that for G? Well, let me see. We want to get G alone. So why don't we rewrite this? This is 4 pi over 1, so it's 4 pi square root of L over square root of G. Does that make sense? The 4 pi goes to the top with the square root of L, and the 1 times, you put a 1 here if you want. It doesn't, 1 times root G is just root G. Okay. Now, good to there so far. Now, this gives us a fraction on each side. Let's cross multiply. Whenever you have a fraction on each side, just cross multiply. So T times the square root of G is 4 pi square root of L. Okay. Now, what are we trying to solve for? G. Here's the wall. Let G saying I want to be alone, so divide by the T. Boom. So this gives us what? This gives us square root of G is 4 pi square root of L over T. Okay, now getting close. We want regular G though. We don't want square root of G. How do we turn that square root of G into regular G? Parenthesis 2 power. Got to do it to both sides though. Cancels the root. G equals. Now, what do you do with the square on this side? You square everything. Square the 4, square the pi, square the root, square the T. 4 squared is 16, pi squared is just pi. The root gets removed, and the t gets squared on the bottom. There it is, 16 pi squared L over T squared. 16 pi squared L over T squared. Got it. Okay, so here we are in number 22. And they're giving me, this is y equals minus 2 x plus 5 squared plus 1. So remember how we do these. Whenever they have the parentheses squared, you just go opposite, same. So negative 5, the opposite of positive 5 is negative 5. And then the same, that's going to be the center. So the center of the graph is back 5, 4, 5, up 1, right there, at back 5, up 1. There's the center of the graph, okay? That's the vertex. Back 5, up 1. Now, how do you finish the graph from there? Remember, you look at the number in the very front, put it over 1. This is like a slope. Rise over run. So you go down 2. You go over 1, both directions. There's the graph. See how I went down 2, right? Down 2 over 1 in both directions, okay? And they want the line of symmetry. That's the line right here that goes right through the middle of the graph. That just hits at negative 5. That's x equals negative 5. See, it hits the x-axis right there at negative 5. This is at negative 5, isn't it? Negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. It hits the x-axis at negative 5, so it's x equals negative 5. The max or the min. Like, look at that blue U shape. What's his highest or lowest point? Well, he has a highest point. That's his highest. That's the highest he gets, huh? And what's that height? That's a height of 1. That's the y value. Its height is 1. And that's a maximum, right? That's the highest. He has no minimum. He goes down forever. He has no lowest, but he has a highest value of 1. And which one's the right graph for him? Can you tell which one is left and up and going down? Let's see. That's the one that's the same as ours. Just like that. Okay, so this one's going to be pretty much the same. Whenever they have the parentheses squared, you can just go opposite, same. So the opposite of +1 is -1, and the same of -9 is -9. That's the center of the graph. So let's do that graph. Back 1, down 9. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Boom, right there. Back 1, down 9. There's the center of the U shape, okay? And now, where does it go? Let me rewrite it over here. It's negative x plus 1 squared minus 9. Okay, so where does the graph go from there? Well, remember the number in the front. Well, there's no number in the front there. So what does that mean is really there? 1, -1, huh? Over 1. That's the rise over the run. So how do you rise -1? You go down 1, and then run +1, you go right 1 and left 1. Boom, boom. There's the U shape. Okay, the parabola it's called. What's the line of symmetry? It's the line that goes right through the middle of the U shape. That's at x is -1, right? This is the x-axis. It hits the x-axis back 1. It's always the x value of the center. X equals the x value of the center. What's the max or min? Well, this one has a highest point right here. Isn't this the highest that blue graph ever gets? He goes way below that. He gets way lower, but this is his highest, which is -9. It's always the y value of the center. -9. That's a maximum. That's as high as he ever gets. And which one is the right graph? Looks like D. It's that one. There we go. Okay, number 24, they want me to find the vertex and graph it and do everything. Okay, this is Y in the front, right? So here I rewrote it. Now notice, when there's no parentheses squared, we must use x is -b over 2a, right? So we can't do opposite same. Cannot do opposite same, right? When there's no parentheses squared, we cannot do opposite same. Instead, we must use x is -b over 2a. Do you see what I mean? Look back. Look at number 23. See how I'm going to erase some of this. On 23, there's parentheses squared, so I just did opposite, same, and that was totally easy. Back on 22, same thing. See the parentheses square there? So I just did opposite, same. See those two, 22 and 23, both have parentheses squared. But this one, there's no parentheses squared. There's no parentheses anywhere. So I cannot do opposite same. You need a different technique. You got to do x is -b over 2a. So here we go. A is -2, B is +2. X is -b, -2 over 2 times A, -2. What's that? -2 over -4. That's a half, isn't it? I just divided top and bottom by 2, and 2 negatives made positive. So X is, I'm going to use a decimal, 0.5, a half. So now how do you find Y? Plug in to get Y. Plug into what? To the original equation. Y is -2x squared plus 2x plus 8. Grab that 0.5, plug it in, plug it in. Y is -2 times 0.5 squared times plus 2 times 0.5 plus 8. So use your calculator. It'll tell you this is 0.25 plus 1 plus 8 minus 0.5 plus 9. So Y is 8.5. So we got Y. So all that work is just to get the center. So the center, the vertex, is x is 0.5, y is 8.5. So So I didn't notice they said make a fraction, make a fraction. So I better change this to fractions. How do you change 0.5? That's a half. Now 8.5 is 8.5, isn't it? Here, let me write it up here. 8.5. Now, how do you change 8.5 to a norm instead of a mixed number to a fraction? Remember, you multiply the bottom and add the top. 8 times 2 is 16. Add the 1, so it's 17 halves. So this becomes, there's the center. 1/2, comma 17 halves. So on number 24, the center is 1/2, comma 17 halves, or 0.5, 8.5. Same thing, right? That's the center. Now what else? They want the x-coordinate, so this would be a half. Oops, 1/2. This is 17 halves. They want fractions. The equation of the line of symmetry. So the line of symmetry. So if we were to graph this thing now, let's graph this thing. Over half a unit, up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.5. Right there. It's way up there. So that's up 8.5. So over a half, up 8.5. Okay. And then where does it go from there? Let me write the equation out here. Y equals minus 2x squared plus 2x plus 8. Okay, so I found the center. Now, where does it go from there? Well, this is a slope in the front. Rise over run, same thing. So go down 2, 1, 2. We're going from middle of box to middles to middles, right? Down 2, over 1 each direction, right? Down 2, over 1. There's the graph of the U-shape, okay? What's the line of symmetry? Now, it wants the line of symmetry. That's the line that goes right through the middle. That's x equals the x-coordinate. It's always the x-coordinate because if you keep this line going down, it'll hit right here at a half. This is 1, 2, 3 on the x-axis, right? It's hitting at a half. And then it's asking, so that's x equals a half. The max or min, what's a fraction? So this up here is the max, isn't it? It's the highest that graph ever goes, which is what? 8.5 or 17 halves. 17 halves is as high as that graph ever goes. So 17 halves, that's a maximum. And which one's the right graph? Let's see. It's right here over, it's right here, right and up. And going down, it's this one, huh? There it is. Okay, last one, they have y equals 16x squared plus 40x plus 25. They want the y-intercept. So remember how to find intercepts? I'll come over here. Y-intercept set x to 0. Remember, you always set the opposite letter to 0. So we take this equation. Y equals 16x squared plus 40x plus 25. And I put in 0, 0 for x. So 16 times 0 squared plus 40 times 0 plus 25. That's 0 plus 0 plus 25. Y is 25. So now, careful that they want an ordered pair. So that means they want an x and a y with a comma. What's the x? Well, x equals 0 led to y equals 25. So that's 0, 25. Now let's find the x-intercept. What do? Comma, set y to 0. You see how if you want a y-intercept, you set x to 0. If you want an x-intercept, you set y to 0. Put that on your 3x5 card. There'll be one question asking for x and y-intercepts on the exam. So y-intercept, make x 0. X-intercept, make y 0. You always make the opposite letter 0. So let's put in 0 for y. So we get 0 equals 16x squared plus 40x plus 25. So what are we going to do with that? Our friend, the quadratic formula. This is a, b, c, negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. And so what do we get there? Negative b is 40. Whoops, getting sloppy here. Plus or minus the square root of 40 squared, 1600, minus 1600 all over 32. Notice that's all 0, huh? So we just get minus 40 over 32. Divide top and bottom by 8. Oh, by the way, this is what x equals, isn't it? X equals. Divide top and bottom by 8. And x equals minus 5/4. There it is. Oh, actually it wants an ordered pair again, so that's going to be minus 5/4, comma 0, right? Because y equals 0 led to x equals minus 5/4. So x minus 5/4, y 0. That's the x-intercept for that one.